Welcome back to the Hex Drinker's House of Commons, your one-stop shop for everything competitive and at the common rarity. Chev, you're looking lovely today. How are you feeling?
Why, thank you. I'm actually feeling pretty good. Julian, I've had a whirlwind of emotion since we last spoke. And for the record, we last spoke about 10 minutes ago. It started on a bit of a downturn when I threw something out just as I remembered I hadn't put a new bag in the trash can. So that was a rough one. But then, one of Julian's packages from Card Kingdom, of all the cards he's purchased for the Hex Drinker Olympics, coming to you live in 3 weeks, arrived at my doorstep. And I was able to look at some of the secret tech Julian's running. And listeners, if you've thought about Svella in recent days, and you're looking to make a Svella deck, PDH, EDH, what have you, and you want the correct tokens, and you just can't find them, blame Julian. Because on his list, he has ordered 25 Icy Manoliths.
I bought all the ones that they had.
The confidence of thinking, I'm going to have 25 Icy Manoliths. How much mana that is? That's 25 times 3, 75 mana that you expect to be casting on your Manoliths. I'm excited to see if you can pull it off.
Ever since I made Svella, I have made it a point to corner the market on Icy Manolith tokens, foil and non-foil. So slowly but surely, I will. It's like Scrooge McDuck, right? He dives into his bath of
yours
money.
Is
I'm just
brittle
gonna...
and more like the TwitchCon inflatable pit.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah,
it's a bit of a
yes.
That's how I'm feeling.
I'm glad that you're just in such high spirits because we have a lot of cool things to talk about today. As usual, we're going to talk about some community content. We're going to do a deck of the week, a PDC match that I got to talk about. But first, about 10 minutes before 10 minutes ago, you and I were actually engaged in some combat with the fellas over at the PDH pod. We were back on the Monday PDH stream.
It was a matchup for the ages. We had Brad on Killian, Lobert on Alert Heedbonder, the Ikoria Vigilance Tribal Uncommon. I was playing Primaris Chaplain. I wrote the wrong thing in the notes because it's such a weird name, but it's Primaris Chaplain, one of the cards from the Warhammer 40k decks. And Julian was up to some stuff with Tor Wauki, but a different deck than last time, Julian. There was a card that kept coming up in this build. What was it again?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if coming up would be the right word. More like it was constantly approaching, but it never quite got there.
As we reach infinity, I feel like this was something I learned in math about 10 years ago.
The limit does not exist, something. I guess we missed Mean Girls Day. Yeah, I have been absolutely in love with Tor Wauki recently. I played that initial PDH version a couple weeks ago when we were there. I, spoiler alert, made a budget version for EDH, and I also made this PDH version that tries to take advantage of Dragon's Approach. I was actually inspired by last week when we discussed the Possibility Storm game. There was a Dragon's Approach list in that game. I believe it was the Storm Xyrylyl list. Unfortunately, I don't have the mana reduction, but I was like, this seems like something, if this is already viable in cPDH, I can't even imagine what it's going to do in regular PDH, and of course, the extra damage boost from Tor Wauki. Pretty crazy. So yeah, I had 30 Dragon's Approaches in my list, and I cast a lot of them, and I was happy.
There were quite a few cast. Yeah, paying 3 mana, dealing 4 damage to every opponent is... it gets out of hand very fast, and especially towards the end of both games. A spoiler alert, Julian won the first game, came very close to winning the second game, but on some of those later turns, being able to pay 6 mana and deal 8 damage to all of your opponents, yes, you start with 30 life, but that goes away pretty fast.
Once again, also Tor Wauki just getting that extra 2 damage, two damage with lifelink that I can kind of just either attempt to clean up players or clean up small creatures as well. It's been doing it for me. Now, I will say, my work was cut out for me because all 3 of the other lists, for whatever reason, had ridiculous amounts of life gain. Whether that was the Alert Heedbonder, who I can forgive people for not knowing this card because it's it's something. But yeah, Alert Heedbonder gaining often 4 or 5 life a turn. Chev, you drew the literal enchantment lifelink both games and were consistently attacking for like 5 or 6 with lifelink. And then Brad playing Killian in the first game had like 3 or 4 different extort creatures over the course of the game and was extorting a bunch, but also of course Killian has lifelink, so he was attacking for a bunch and gaining. Yeah, I did win that first game, but I don't know how. I thought it was going to be way quicker than it was. It took a minute.
It took a minute there for sure. I think some of it was, you have 3 Voltron decks, and this kind of happened more in game 1 than game 2, where game 2, Lobert was still on Alert Heedbonder, I was still on Primaris Chaplain. and we kind of domed each other a few times for quite a hefty amount of damage. But in game one, you've still got 3 Voltron decks, 3 very large creatures swinging at everyone. And yes, you're gaining some life, but between having probably at least one of the big creatures hit you per turn and 8 damage from Dragon's approaches, and in game 1, Julian, you also had Reckless Fireweaver and Spear Spewer online. So
yes,
a hefty amount of damage is being done regardless of life gain. Mine was kind of capped at the number of creatures as the power of Primaris, as Alert Hued Bonders was kind of the number of vigilance creatures on the field. So it wasn't completely insurmountable. It was basically added up to we could stomach 1 Dragon's Approach per turn. But then you had the audacity to play 2 or 3 and with pingers backup. So I think both games, it would have been better to just kind of bap you in the head repeatedly. And I'm sure that'll happen as Tor Wauki continues to show up in our pods. But the deck was very strong. It was very cool to kind of see it in its element.
I liked all the decks. The decks were crazy. You explained last week that Brad called you out on Twitter about Primaris Chaplain and stuff. I think your deck did what it needed to do. I think you took it to him. You actually were able to get a Voltron kill in the second game.
Yes, yeah. Primaris Chaplain, I built largely out of spite, but started to fall more and more in love with it as I was putting it together. Basically, 4 mana, 3/3, whenever it attacks, it gets indestructible, and then it's got Battle Cry. But the indestructibility is really what I focus on with all kinds of artifacts and auras and equipments that, care about when your creature attacks. And since your creature is always going to survive combat, you don't really have to worry about what it's swinging into. That being said, when you equip this thing with Pro White and someone's board is all white creatures, you can get a commander damage kill in pretty quickly. And that's what Primaris Chaplain was able to do. Gaining 5 life per turn, but taking 6 in the air from Lobert's. It was some Griffin from, I think, like Portal, a 2/3, I think, with Vigilance. But then it was equipped with these, gives a creature +4/+2, and they don't untap during an untap step, which in a Vigilance tribal deck is pretty strong. I think that one hit you a few times, but when I started dishing out some very targeted attacks, it came from me as well. So gain 5 per turn, lose 6 is not how you really survive a game for a long period of time. And although it wasn't Lobert that took me out, it was instead a 2 mana give Tor Wauki indestructible and then killing me off the cast trigger.
Well, listen, I was trying to get all of y'all, and then Brad had the nerve to second game. Brad played Risen Reef. Put a pin in that. I'm gonna come back. He played Risen Reef. He had the nerve to negate my first Dragon's Approach, and then you memory lapsed my second
Lapse
one.
of Certainty.
Oh, sorry. Lapse of Certainty, right. The overcosted white version of Memory Lapse, which is a blue card.
Indeed.
Yeah, so I had to make do with what I was given. I was going to be able to kill Chev. I directed both my Tor Wauki triggers at him. He happened to his creature was tapped, so I happened to attack him, and then he was at 2 life, and I was like, well, I've really been saving this protection spell. I had it for like 5 turns, and I was just holding it up just in case people came at Tor Wauki, but I was like, well, I can't let him attack and gain 6, so I guess I just have to raw dog this one.
I think my favorite moment of that game came right afterward, and it was the Lapse of Certainty puts the Dragon's Approach on top of your library. You had a Commander Sphere out that you could sack to draw a card, get another one of those triggers out, but when you dealt damage to me, I had the initiative, and you were forced to look through your library for a basic, put it into your hand, and shuffle, removing the Dragon's Approach from grasp.
Yeah, now that you said that, I probably should have Commander Sphered there. I don't know if it would have won me the game, but I was like, oh wait, no, I wanted that. I really wanted that. I will say I got to cast like 8 or 9 Dragon's Approaches that game, which was great.
They just kept coming.
My opening hand was like 4 Dragon's Approaches, a Mana Rock, and 2 lands. And I was like, yep, I'm good. I'm good. So, Chev, though, since we are technically a competitive Pauper podcast, Indeed. How did Primaris Chaplain hold up? Obviously, you didn't build it specifically to be competitive, but I have an idea that you would want to be doing that sort of Voltron-y thing anyway. So, do you think it can make the leap into the competitive world?
I think the biggest thing here is it would have to make a fight for why you would play Primaris Chaplain over Killian. So I can't remember if Killian has a list on the database. It grows by the day. I'm not, for some reason, I think it might have an older one from Papa Pauper. When you have Killian that comes down for less, has relevant abilities in Lifelink and Menace that you'd want to be gifting with the enchantments, and has auras cost 2 less, I feel Primaris Chaplain could make an argument that it's more durable because obviously indestructible is a very good keyword, but you're not going to be leaning too heavily into auras, because that was one comment that Brad made in game 1, is when you remove Killian and all the auras that are attached to it, all those auras are in the graveyard, and common is not the best way to get them back. There are plenty of ways around this, and even as we saw in one of our own cPDH games where Eric helmed a Killian list and was able to kind of withstand anything we were throwing at it, and with all the card draw creatures we've seen in white and black recently, I don't think Primaris Chaplain has what it takes to overtake Killian 9 times out of 10. Now, there's probably a place for 2 Orzhov Voltron decks on the list, but I think I would be remiss to, or I would be ignorant to really push Primaris Chaplain without really digging into how I can benefit off of this indestructibility and how this actually is more beneficial than Lifelink and Menace, especially when you have those white enchantments that tap down your opponent's creatures that on Killian essentially make it unblockable. If your creature's unblockable, you don't have to worry about indestructibility during combat. It's not going to die. So it's the kind of thing where there's enough out there and enough good Killian tech that I think Primaris Chaplain comes in just a close second. I'll probably be looking elsewhere first for a competitive list.
We do indeed have a Killian list in the database. It actually comes to us from Clay, of all people.
Ooh.
Unfortunately, it was last updated 7 months ago. Clay,
come on.
Get on it. Come on. Give the theater kid some love.
You're going to be hit by Corey's script.
I think Killian's crazy. I mean, Killian was putting in some work, like we were saying, with Brad. That kind of got me thinking, because I think that other than probably Alert Heatbonder, I do think that all of these lists could be ported into cPDH. And Killian already has, but I think, like you said, Primaris Chaplain would be like Killian at home. We've seen that Dragon's Approach can be good. I don't think Tor Wauki is the move. Having a 5-mana commander like that
right.
Also, it's in Rakdos, so it's not as good colors, but I definitely think a deck styled similarly to what I did, like maybe like the Storm Skrillex list, or even something like a Goblin Electromancer.
Yeah.
If you can start casting multiple Dragon's Approaches a turn, 2 or 3 a turn consistently, and you get to play all the good blue draw. That my deck was basically Dragon's Approaches and the black draw spells so that I could draw into more Dragon's Approaches. Arguably, things just get even better when you can do that in blue.
Yeah.
It overcomes the weakness of burn decks, which is like normally you have to target one person. So really you have to do 90 life instead of 30 life.
Any last game commentary you want there, Julian?
I think the last thing is Brad's Risen Reef deck.
Yeah.
I think we have seen that for something like cPDH, you can kind of just play Simic whatever, and it will be good. We've talked about Risen Reef in Oakley's Maelstrom Wanderer Elemental Tribal deck and just how much value it accrues. And even though Brad literally bricked on lands like the first 3 turns of the second game.
First like 4 or 5 turns.
Yeah, he wasn't drawing lands. He also like didn't have blue mana for a long time either. But yeah, he was able to he had like 17 lands at the end of the game. It was crazy. And you can do that. And then at one point he literally pitched, like he had too many cards in hand. So he discarded Peregrine Drake. And Chev and I looked at him. We were like, what are you doing with that right there? I mean, I think that just kind of shows like, yeah, you could easily just run all the standard Simic combo lines in that. And I think I'd have to look at the elemental pool, but I definitely think that a Risen Reef deck could be viable.
I think you've got enough small bodies.
Although I think I would agree that like it would take a bit for me to run Risen Reef over something like Landlore Weaver or like even Tatiova.
Right.
So.
You'd have to focus on those explosive turns. How many lands can you get out? Because like something like Tatiova, you draw the card and you gain life off of every land played. And some turns you're playing multiple lands, but probably most turns you're not. Whereas Risen Reef, depending on how many elementals you play, can get a little explosive. Like that one turn we saw where cast a Mole Drifter for Evoke, drawing 2 cards, then Ghostly Flickered both Risen Reef and Mole Drifter to draw 2 more cards and get 2 more triggers for a total of 3 Risen Reef triggers, which at minimum draws him an additional 3 cards, and at maximum would put 3 lands into play. And so that was really when the game turned around for Brad as well. So it's kind of just that ability to come out of nowhere and continuously gain those resources led to higher and higher powered turns.
But anyway, we had a great time. Great games. Want to thank those guys. Definitely tune into the stream if you get a chance. They stream on Saturdays and Mondays.
Correct.
Brad has a thing where you can sign up and come in and play with them. So do that as well. Chev will put the link in the description, in the show notes, I guess. I don't know.
It's on Brad's Linktree, Brad Drac V on over on Twitter. You can sign up for both Saturdays and Mondays. Saturdays fill up relatively quickly, so you want to look more in advance. Mondays are a little chiller.
Hence why we are there.
We are there. Enough about Monday Night Pauper. Julian, you've played a different type of Pauper Commander this week, the PDC League. How did your games go?
Oh, baby. You know the meme. Not going to lie, they had us in the first half. I was 0-2. I was feeling down, but last week we talked about how I managed to pick up 2 more games, and guess what? Your boy won again this week. I am finally positive in the standings. Let's go.
3-2, right?
Yeah, 3-2. 3-2. I played against another prolific contributor to the database and member of the community, XRLYLYL, or Xyrylyl. Everyone knows him, right?
Xyrylyl has really been showing up in the cPDH database. Kind of the first time that I had heard or seen from them was the Cormella list for New Capenna, which is a combo list that we discussed on the pod when it first came out, the After Dark episode. And since then has really focused on bringing more combo-based decks to cPDH so far from the submissions I've seen. I believe they come from cEDH, so that's kind of the mindset that they incorporate down to this level. But this wasn't any of those. This was Sprite Dragon.
Yeah, Sprite Dragon is an interesting little card. All these red-blue decks, right? Yeah, so Sprite Dragon is a red and a blue for a 1/1 flying haste. And whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, you put a 1/1 counter on that guy. So he can get big real quick. Actually, never mind, I lied. It's actually a non-creature spell. So he's getting crazy for everything. Chev, you actually we played a couple test games just to test the matchup.
Yeah.
And I'm not gonna lie, it didn't look too good for me.
I think we played 2 test games and you lost both of them.
Yes, you kind of stopped me. Sprite Dragon can get really big really quick, which, as we remember from the Wilson game, is problematic for me. Also, Sprite Dragon is the first list that I've encountered that has counterspells. I always just assume my plays are going to resolve, and I learned that against Chev and also a few times against Xyrylyl that no, I need to account for the fact that sometimes that blue mana will actually prevent me from doing my plays. Once again, had to coordinate some crazy time zones. Xyrylyl is over in Australia, so that was
we got quite an Australian crew playing these Pauper formats.
Yeah, let's get into the games. Game 1. Pretty slow, frankly. Slow in terms of development, but actually like very quick and snappy play. That's one thing that I really liked about Xyrylyl was just every turn. Bada bing, bada boom, gotta go, do the thing. So that was super cool. We kind of both just are staring at each other. Like I'm drawing a couple cards, he's drawing a couple cards. He also was very reluctant to play out Sprite in the beginning, but eventually he just kind of starts throwing it, but luckily I'm always able to just kill it immediately because, like I said, that thing can grow very quickly, especially when he has more and more mana. He did mulligan down to 5, and I mulligan to 6. I remember I discussed that beforehand, that like just so much more mulliganing. But then he plays Opal Palace, which is kind of an innocuous card, but it really honestly messed the entire game up because all of a sudden, another thing is he has a lot of lands in his list. He has, I want to say, he has 39 lands, which is kind of crazy. I'm only playing 30. He was always hitting his land drop, so he could always cast Sprite Dragon. So eventually, he would just like play Sprite Dragon. I'd be like, okay, kill it. He'd be like, okay, next turn, play Sprite Dragon. Okay, kill it. He'd be like, next turn, play Sprite Dragon. And this is another thing too, because I was using resources out of my hand, whereas he was just casting his commander. So I looked up and I was like, wait, why do you still have 7 cards in your hand? But yeah, so he has Opal Palace, and since he can continually cast Sprite Dragon, now it's coming down as a 3/3, a 4/4, a 5/5. I think it came down as a 6/6 finally, but like now it's costing me 2 cards to actually kill it. I was able to luckily go Landfall, Searing Blaze plus Spectacled Skewer the Critics. It costs 10. He hits his land drop again. G2 Amplifier, which has like whenever you cast a thing, get +2/+0. You know those kind of. He was playing a bunch of those in addition, like Kiln Fiend, that Monster Spears and stuff. He goes G2 Amplifier, Ponder, plus Teamer Battle Rage. And then he mana leaks his own Teamer Battle Rage and then pays the 3 for exact lethal at 14, right? So it's like G2 Amp, 1 base power, Ponder, +2 up to 3, Teamer Battle Rage, +2 up to 5, but it would be doubled. And then he mana leaks it up to 7, doubled 14. So yeah, game 1 didn't go my way, but. Game 2, we actually each keep 7, surprising. I am able to Treasure Cruise on turn like 3 or 4 for 1 mana and then Mystic Sanctuary getting it back. And then I Electrode, and I have mana open, so I go Expedite, attempt to draw into my Treasure Cruise. He casts Lava Dart from the grave, which you just sack a mountain. I was like, dang, that's bold. But I have the Crimson Wisps, which also gives haste and draws a card. So I'm able to kill one of his creatures. Electrode dies, unfortunately. I draw my card, and then I Treasure Cruise again. So I got to double Treasure Cruise, which is pretty sick. And just remember, kids, Mystic Sanctuary is a fair card. A little bit later, I play Electrode again for 5. He plays Reject, but I have enough mana to actually just pay the 3. This was another game where we kind of were just staring at each other. He was much more reluctant to play Sprite Dragon at this point since I was able to kill it like every time last game.
Right. He
kills it again, and then I finally get to play it for 7, and he finally has no cards in hand. And I'm like, okay, all right, this is my moment. And then he's still at 20 life, and I don't really have much in my hand, and I start drawing some lands. That was a little sketchy. But I just continue to cast Electrode and cast the spells that I have. Luckily, he's just not drawing anything either. Then I draw into Tandem Lookout, which is Soul Bond, and then whenever the Soul Bonded creature deals damage to an opponent, not just combat damage, you get to draw a card. And luckily, I had
curiosity.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So I Tandem Lookout, and I was like, all right, now let's go. Ping you for 1, draw a card, and he was like, all right, I've seen enough. Let's carry on. So that was actually the first time I've ever gotten to resolve Tandem Lookout. It feels good. It feels good.
It really does.
Contingent on the fact that he didn't have any cards in hand, and I had a million mana, so I could play everything. But yeah. And then we go to my very first ever game 3. All the other matches I've played have been 2-0, either in my favor or not. Off to a real good start. Turn 2 Kessig Flame Breather. Love to see it. Crazy interaction. I get to go Frantic Search into Fiery Temper. Right. So Frantic Search 3 mana, draw 2, discard 2, untap 3 lands. Mm-hmm. And I say, okay, I'm going to discard Fiery Temper, but I don't know if it works. Because I played it on turn 3. Mm-hmm. So the question was basically, when you have to pay for Fiery Temper, has Frantic Search already resolved? And another part of that was that Frantic Search it's two full sentences. So draw 2, discard 2, then a separate sentence, untap. So it's like, how does that work? We found out that it actually does work because you discard whatever Madness card into exile, and then after the spell resolves, basically, you have the chance to...
Okay.
Right. It's not going to check for that mid-resolution. And luckily, it all untaps. So then I can pay for it, kill his Sprite Dragon, which is sick. He gets more aggressive on the Sprite. Again, I'm still able to kill it every turn. And eventually, I once again grind him down to no cards. And I have Flame Breather plus Electrode plus Goblin Electromancer. And I'm drawing a nice, good mix of draw spells and burn spells. And I'm just able to basically shut everything down, right where I want to be.
Right.
So that was game 3. Went again to 2-1 against Xyrylyl with Sprite Dragon.
Were there any takeaways from this experience besides the play-by-plays?
I'm glad you asked. It's almost like you were reading the show notes. Yeah, I really liked his list. Kind of felt like a merger of my list and the like Loyal Apprentice list, doing a lot of attacking still while also playing that kind of tempo burn strategy that I'm really trying to lean into. One of the crazy things was it felt like he had way more inevitability than I did, especially in game 1. And normally I feel like that would be mine, because like the last 2 games, once I was able to kind of just lock things down, have Electrode plus like one other pinger out, I was like, okay, I can handle anything. But it just felt like he always had it, and him being able to just continually cast Sprite Dragon and not have to use resources in his hand, whereas I was having to use burn spells to kill Sprite Dragon because it is such a threat. It really felt like a big part of it. And Sprite Dragon can just get out of hand so easily. The games were super grindy. The other thing is that he had like 4 different spells that were like deal 1 damage to all creatures, or all creatures your opponents control. Or sometimes it was like modal. It was like destroy target artifact or deal 1 to all creatures, which obviously Electrode's an 0-1. Firebrand Archer is also a 2-1. So it like kills a lot of my stuff. And he killed Electrode like a bunch of times with that over the course of the things. And I was like, why are you playing these? To me, I was like, these look like bad cards. But now that I'm kind of thinking about it, that might be some really good tech. Like I said, like Loyal Apprentice is super prevalent. All those tokens are 1/1s. Loyal Apprentice is a 2/1. There's just a lot of X1s in the format. And I'm wondering if having a few of those in your deck, if you are red, is a good way to have like an out to board swarm strategies and stuff like that.
Yeah, that or Fiery Cannonade or the Dragon's Breath, like those ones that are, deal 2 damage, but something that can just kind of wipe the board in a small but meaningful way.
The other thing about a lot of those 1/1s is it's literally like 1 red mana to do that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But yeah, it was something that I was like, maybe this is something I want to start incorporating, especially if the meta maintains heavy red. Anyway, those were the games. Really much enjoyed it. Thanks to Xyrylyl and also Sick List. Happy that I'm finally positive, and I'm hoping I can continue to take down some dubs. 0-2 to 7-2 or whatever. I forget exactly how many people are in the league, but yeah, good stuff.
As they say, started from the bottom. Julian, we haven't heard you talk enough yet this podcast. They might have been missing your voice specifically. So we also gave you this week's Deck of the Week.
Yes.
What did you decide to showcase from the community this time around?
I picked an Araumi of the Dead Tide list. Now, this is a commander that you and I both have a little bit of experience with. We've both played with it, as well as there's actually an Araumi, like a normal EDH Araumi deck in our pod Eric plays. So we kind of know what's up, but there's a few interesting things about this list. First off, I want to shout out NateDiggity, who I realized we actually talked about last week. But yeah, listen, come on. A deck is good. A deck is good. Stop being so prolific, Nate. Let other people have a chance. The primer is excellent. It's relatively short. It's very simple and straightforward, but I just like the kind of simple elegance of it. And there's a lot of good insight in terms of how to play the deck in this. And also, I think this is interesting because it says even in the primer, Araumi is the commander, and there are some synergies in this, but it's not necessarily a graveyard-centric deck. It wins with a combo, like a lot of other blue-black decks or base blue decks.
Yeah, as we've been covering recently.
I really think that's interesting that so much of cPDH is so contingent on the commander, right? We've talked about how the uncommons are just so much more powerful than literally any card in your deck generally.
Right.
They're very reliant on the commander. And this being a deck that isn't reliant on the commander, I think is interesting and different. I wanted to kind of highlight that. Now, that being said, we still can get crazy with Araumi, right? We have Gary in here. We have a bunch of Fleshbag Marauder style effects. Also, love the Zuberas, which if you don't know what those are, from Kamigawa, of course, so that's why they're weird. Ashen-Skin Zubera, when it's put into the graveyard from play, target opponent discards a card for each Zubera put into a graveyard from play this turn. So obviously, you have 3, right?
Yeah.
And then the blue one does the same thing, but you draw a card. And they're both perfectly fine to just run out because they're both just 2-mana 1/2s. You can chill and block with them. Also, Impaler Strike is another crazy card that you can get off Araumi. When it deals combat damage to a player, you may sacrifice it. It's a flying 3/1. But if you do, draw 3. Drawing 9 sounds pretty good to me.
Jeez.
So yeah. But how are we actually going to win with this deck? We could attack. We could Gary people out. But there is indeed a combo in here. And I really like the way that NateDiggity has laid it out in his primer. It's one combo. He says, hey, listen, there's 3 boxes we need to check. In each one, there's a little bit of redundancy in. So like first off, we need either a Banishing Knack or a Retraction Helix. We are doing Knack Helix. This is a known quantity in cPDH, but we're doing it in a slightly different way, which I think is nice. Then we need a creature to target, which is going to tap and untap in some way. We have a Battered Golem. 3 mana doesn't untap during your untap, but whenever an artifact comes into play, you may untap it, as well as Mirren Spy. Also 3 mana, whenever you cast an artifact, you may untap target creature. And Zephyr Scribe, which is also 3 mana. Whenever you cast a non-creature, untap Zephyr Scribe. Now, these are all cards that I have never seen used in cPDH, so I was like, oh, that's nice, that's different. But yeah, so we're going to Banishing Knack, which will return something, and then we are going to cast one of our 0 mana artifacts, which will trigger all 3 of those creatures to untap, namely Tormod's Crypt, Lotus Petal, and Everflowing Chalice, which I also think are nice because you can search those off things like, Trinket Mage. They don't, unless people know the deck, they don't immediately signal that you're going to be comboing off, right?
Right, exactly. It's a little more intricate.
Yes, yeah, it's a little bit, it's more inconspicuous, which is nice. Once we have that, we've established our infinite loop, right? We have infinite ETBs and LTBs of our artifacts. How are we going to win? We can go for Night Market Lookout. If you have Mirren Spy, you can, whenever it becomes tapped, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Or my personal favorite, Cabal Paladin. Whenever you cast a historic spell, we love bash keywords, baby. Cabal Paladin deals 2 damage to each opponent. I like this iteration of a known quantity in the Banishing Knack or Retraction Helix thing. And also, just cool to see other cards that we don't normally see, right? A lot of this format is staples, so you're like, oh, I know exactly what we're doing. But this is, a little different. Into that, also, we're in blue-black, so we got all the tutors, baby. Even more than, honestly, some other decks that I've seen, which is nice. 9 tutoring effects, a lot of transmute, but also we've got Step Through, which can get us a wizard. You're our wizard, Harry. None of our combo pieces are, but we can get Trinket Mage, which will get us our combo pieces. And there's actually a combo tutor guide in the primer. Another reason that I was so drawn to this primer in particular is it's like, okay, hey, we have Dizzy Spell. We're transmuting. We're always getting Banishing Knack or Retraction Helix or Night Market Lookout, depending on when we have it around. Muddle the Mixture, always getting Merchant Scroll. Merchant Scroll, always getting whatever. I really like that inclusion to the deck, because I think as tutoring becomes prominent, is not the thing. It's always been prominent, right? But sometimes, especially if you're learning a deck, it's nice to know, like, okay, this is what I should get. And since we are running a fairly straightforward deck in terms of the combo, it's nice to know that, kind of have that guidebook. So I really like that inclusion in the primer.
I think you really nailed the head on the nail on the head with a lot of this. Continuing being in the best colors for combo, really, because of all the tutors, and then having the primer really go into like specifically what you want, specifically what you're getting every time, and then keeping the lines very consistent. It makes it a really easy to learn, but probably stepping up the level of combo that we've seen in the previous decks we've already covered. Because as we kind of continue on this combo kick, this one is a little bit more intricate than maybe some of the ones we've seen before, but it is like kind of leveling up in a sense too, but with a lot more redundancy and other things to do with the deck outside of the combo as well.
Just a few other things I wanted to note. We've got Go for the Throat now that it's been downshifted. So I love seeing Go for the Throat in there. Victim of the Night is a card that I feel like I don't see as often as it should. Yes, it's double black, but destroying a non-vampire, non-werewolf, I think there's one other creature type on there. It's just usually just always going to be a kill. So I like seeing that included. Something that I've been including in even like my EDH decks recently, just because it's usually just 2 mana destroy thing.
Right.
Also, Merkel's Edict is a card that I didn't know existed, but nice. You got to have some edicts, and every now and then you roll that D20 and you get a better option. I mean, that's pretty much it, right? It's blue-black. It's got all the good shit.
Yep.
I will say, no Academy Wall in this. NateDiggity, Academy Wall. You're casting tons of instants of sorceries. This is going to help you dig for combo pieces and also fill your grave for Araumi, so you can get a little crazy. One last interaction. Araumi, like I said, even though not essential for the combo, if our combo pieces do get removed, we can recur them with Araumi. And since we can do everything at instant speed, we can just activate her, get our stuff back, and also does give us the haste necessary to actually use Banishing Knack and Retraction Helix. So some mild upside there. Anything else, Chev?
No, I think that about covers it. I don't think I've ever played against the cPDH version of Araumi, but I think it'd be super cool to especially play against a deck that doesn't focus so much on the commander and see how that works in a game politically, where you kind of can, in cPDH, automatically assume that the commander is necessary for what you're going to do, target them, and that is a good plan A for whatever the deck is doing. Get rid of the commander and they can do it a lot less. But in something like Araumi, where it might be kind of a false flag, something for you to attack, but it doesn't actually win them the game, it might be interesting to see kind of like how that plays out in the first couple games you play with new people.
Yeah, there's definitely some obfuscation going on if you're playing in a new group, a new meta. Thanks again to NateDiggity for making a sweet deck.
Deck good.
Listen, if we talk about a bad deck on this podcast, I'm going to be upset. I think our listeners might as well.
I know, we talk a big game, so it helps when we can back it up.
Well, speaking of games, poor segue, but Chev, please lead us into our next segment.
So we, like we've been doing, we now have a video of the week. This one coming to us over from the Tryhards channel. It's a recent game published on the 15th of October. This is a cPDH game featuring Clay on Esior Tormod, Tonus Bolonis on Gretchen Titchwillow, Jonathan on Dargo Kedis, and Bisecting Fantasy, aka I think Jordy, on Abdel, Adrian, and Swordco Sailor. It was a really cool game to watch. It was very different than the previous video we showcased from the Possibility Storm. This one had a lot of really cool things going on. I was super excited to see an Abdel Adrian list in blue-white as opposed to the list we've covered on the database, which is white-black because it's Agent of, I believe, the Shadow Throne. Why did they both have to be Agent? Agent of the whichever one he is, and it has a very different approach, whereas Abdel Adrian and Swordco Sailor is able to kind of really take advantage of blue blink effects and other things to really put out an army, and Swordco Sailor, of course, gives your creature unblockable if you're swinging at the opponent with the mostest. So that was what I was really excited to see going in, and while it did deliver, so did all of the other decks. Julian, what were some of your big takeaways?
Yeah, so first off, just the decks we're seeing in this pod, right, are nice because they're a bit of a departure from the known quantities in cPDH. Obviously, Abdel Adrian is now a known quantity, but like you said, going blue-white instead of white-black is cool. Tormod is a commander that we have not seen in a while. I remember when you and I first started getting into it, We saw a bunch of different Tor mod lists. Toast, I guess, is the moniker. A bunch of lists kind of like that, and they seem to have fallen away a bit. Dargo Ketis is a known quantity.
Right. It's newer. It's enabling Dargo in a different way. Whereas, the Dargo Malcolm classic lists are generating treasures to sack to Dargo to get that engine online. Dargo Ketis plays, I think, every zero-cost spell it can as Ketis fodder, which is tap, sacrifice 3 artifacts and creatures to look at the top 3 of your deck, put 1 into the graveyard. So you get that massive card advantage and a 6 mana reduction on Dargo, plus whatever else you're doing. So it's a way to kind of, remove some of the reliability of Malcolm as an attacker and kind of really get at the heart of what Dargo is trying to do, which usually ends in combo, if not smashing face.
Is this, Jonathan, is this the same person who submitted our current Dargo Ketis list? I should have checked beforehand.
I am not sure. They might have just been playing it.
Fair enough. Anyway, we did discuss this list, but we will probably revisit it at a later time. It's a very interesting list in terms of conventional deck building.
Yes.
And then finally, there's the Gretchen Titchwell list, which, like I was saying earlier, I guess you can just play whatever Simic commander you want and just kind of do... We didn't get to see what kind of like the end win was. It looked like it was almost trying to function similar to Ley and Lore, using the tapping and untapping. I'm assuming we generate infinite mana and then draw our deck with Gretchen. Maybe Capsize with buyback.
So the Dargo Ketis list, or Keskit list, it's not Ketis.
Chev, you wrote it wrong on the notes.
I did. It's Dargo Keskit, Flesh Sculptor. That list actually comes to us from Xyrylyl.
Dang, I knew that. I was like Xyrylyl. You're the Xyrylyl?
Now, whether Xyrylyl is Jonathan, I don't know, because unless their parents named them that, the mystery, at least for us, is still out there. So if someone could kindly correct us, that would be great as well.
I need to go back and listen for an Australian accent, and then I'll know.
I was also really interested to see the SEO or Tormod list do its thing, because it kind of seems like the final form of Tormod, in a sense, where the Ghost of Ramiro Di Pietro and Tormod was cute, in the sense where Ghost will put things into your graveyard and potentially get them back if you discarded, thus triggering Tormod. It's a lot of mana to play for your commanders. Yes, you're in blue-black, which can let you be a little more dirtily, but it just seemed like if the engine is moving cards in and out of your graveyard, maybe focus more on Tormod and less on Ghost, which Eseor does. And as we've seen in EDH with Oakley's Eseor Timna build, which goes turn 2 Eseor, turn 3 Timna, having that sort of ward for your commander that is doing the thing can be really useful and a deterrent against using removal or your opponent's using removal on your board state. Because if I'm not thinking I have one removal spell, I'll draw a second one and be able to take them both out. I'm thinking I have one removal spell. Eseor isn't worth it at that point. What other commander is? And so it kind of gives Tormod a little more room to kind of do their thing, which I think can be really powerful.
It might be interesting to see if we just get more and more of these partner builds, because Eseor, that protection for such a cheap creature is just so potent, like you said. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Tormod is a real freaking threat on its own. So being able to give it extra protection, for sure. I want to discuss the Abdel list briefly, because it did not win, but it was kind of going off, and it was like just the right amount of productive dirtle for me. This one focused mainly on playing all sorts of like artifacts and stuff that have ETBs. There's a ton of kind of like trinkets, right, that are like 1 or 2 mana. They ETB, draw a card, and then they're easy fodder for putting under Abdel when they come in, right? So you make a ton of soldiers. I believe the first soldiers created there was like 4, and then I don't think there was like ever less than 8, frankly. And like you said, you can now get blue blink, and blinking Abdel gives you multiple triggers because Abdel leaves, all your things come back, they all have ETBs, they trigger, Abdel comes back, you just put them all under, and you make a ton more soldiers.
Yeah, I think we saw it largely, it was kind of funny because between that and then the Dargo Keskit list, we saw a ton of the ETBs on artifacts. Abdel's felt a little nicer. I think there's that one mana rock that deals 1 damage to an opponent on entry. I think it's Hierophant's Cup. And I think maybe something else drew a card when he's bringing it in. But Keskit also had a bunch of those new Baldur's Gate, kind of in the spirit of Myr Wellspring is what I'm thinking of. The like 2 mana, search for a basic when it enters and leaves.
No, it's, Mycosynth Wellspring.
Mycosynth Wellspring. Is it?
Yeah.
That doesn't sound right.
It is.
All right, I'm going to check you on that real quick. I'm going to call in my challenge.
I'm going to phone a friend. I'm going to ask the audience.
Wellspring. It is Mycosynth Wellspring, and Ichor Wellspring is what I'm thinking of. So points to Julian, but these 2-mana artifacts that have an ETB and LTB, and we got a couple more in, I think, Baldur's Gate and maybe AFR, but the Keskit list had the one that, enters and leaves make a construct, enters and leaves make a treasure, and so they were kind of doing similar things, only once because they all get sacked to the almighty Dargo and Keskit. But seeing Abdel, it was just the right amount of Dirtle for you come in. I think they floated mana between one of the blinks too, which is, if you're blinking rocks, they don't have summoning sickness, so you can kind of get a little dirty with it.
It's cute.
And then, of course, the one thing to point out with Abdel, and it was brought up on the episode as well, was killing Abdel with the exile trigger on the stack to remove the blink at all, so they don't generate the creatures even if Abdel dies. So that's something to keep in mind when you inevitably end up across the table.
So, Chev, before we move on to the inevitable conclusion of the game, I remember that you were very hyped on the Abdel list when we first discussed it on our first episode, actually, the black-white list. How do you think that stacks up against this blue-white list? Do you have a preferred strategy? Do you have a strategy that you think is going to be more optimal?
Yeah, I would love to see them kind of, if we could get a fully Abdel pod together, find what other enchantments work in the other colors, but without kind of seeing them directly go head-to-head, I still have to lean towards the Abdel Iron Throne list that we have in the database. While I do like the flickering and the ability to kind of have more redundancy for combos in the white-blue list, that's not what we saw from the list when it was being played. It really just capitalized on Blink and made a ton of 1/1s to overwhelm. I really like what the Agent of the Iron Throne does, which is whenever an artifact or creature you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life, which I think does a little better than the Sword Coast when it comes to what Abdel is really trying to do, right? Because Sword Coast Sailor can make one creature, specifically your commander, unblockable, and while that's cool, Abdel is kind of at home in this flicker loop. Even though the deck we have isn't specifically a combo list, it does have the pieces to do it for the infinite ETB LTB, which with Agent of the Iron Throne, whenever an artifact or creature you control is put into a graveyard, each opponent loses 1 life. So not only are we making the 1/1s, but we're kind of dealing damage outside of combat, and we never really need Abdel Adrian to connect. And then we do get the more painful black ETBs like Gary or Fleshbag, Burglar Rat, all these things that kind of make it a little bit more of a problem on your opponent while also dealing damage with the throne. So I think without being fully informed, I have to go Iron Throne.
That's fair enough. I think you're right. Yeah, both decks are definitely mid-rangey, right? We're just trying to generate value. Some might say that we're dirtling a little bit, but yes, I think you're right. I think the inevitability of the black-white list, especially since it does have that combo in there, which there may be a combo in the blue-white list, but we just, like you said, we didn't get to see it. I agree with you. That black-white list that shit was scary when we talked about it. But anyway, Abdel did not take it down. It was actually the Dargo and Keskit list. Chev, what happened on that fateful final turn?
Well, it was a tale as old as time. A rogue Thermopod and a very sacrifice-happy Dargo kind of took the game. The Thermopod Dargo line, of course, being that like whenever you sack Dargo, 2 Thermopod and net a red, you also reduce Dargo's cost by 2 because another thing has been sacrificed, so then you can just recast Dargo infinite number of times, infinite ETBs, pick your favorite poison. It ended in a relatively spectacular fashion because I don't think I've ever seen a Thermopod actually successfully cast and resolve.
Yeah, normally people don't like Thermopod. They know that you're up to no good. I will say it ended in even more spectacular fashion because, like you said, normally we're just doing infinite ETBs and LTBs. People might think of something like an Impact Tremors. Mm-hmm. But no. We were actually just going for the infinite casts. We finished with a Grape Shot. Ladies and gentlemen.
Should have called that out. Yeah, that was
not something that I have ever seen.
Storm ending, yeah.
Yeah. I also got to say that Thermopod was tutored by a transmuted brain spoil. And you know what? I just love to see it. I love to see it.
These are the hopes that and dreams that games are made from.
Crazy game. All the decks were super cool. They played excellent, and we hope they keep putting out high-quality content.
Indeed. So if you're listening, Clay, keep putting out high-quality content.
Yeah, and update your Killian list, dang it.
All right, we've burned enough bridges for one episode.
Well, listen, we know that I'm here to now. That's my job. Is I have to start beef with everyone.
I don't know if I condone that. I'm not sure I'm willing to accept that as our all formats at the common rarity and whoever Julian decides to fight this week. It's not even that big of a community yet, so like we're gonna have to redo some fights pretty soon.
That's fair enough. We'll just work that. That'll be part of the weekly segment. Like who are we fighting today?
Each season.
Yeah, Chev, you'll have to put the disclaimer like these beefs do not represent the
extended
official views
of the LLC.
Yeah, exactly. Good lord.
All right, it's time for Julian to go to bed.
I am a little tired. I'm not gonna lie. Wait a minute, that's After Dark. Shut up. Anyway, this has been House of Commons, your one-stop shop for all things competitive and at the common rarity. Chev.
See ya.